Yeah. We processed again at Fort Devens. Then we took a cab to Providence, and they dropped me off. I was the first one they dropped off. And then, you don't realize it at the time. You're not going to really see these guys again, especially the ones that lived in New York or wherever. And he'd say, "I'll see you later," and you walk, and I say, "What do you mean? I'm not going to even see these guys again." But yeah, we got back, and then a lot of us would see one another. We were playing the same bands. After that, was a lot of them. But a lot of them have passed away since then. Matter of fact, there's only 5 of us now from the original 13 that enlisted together. And there's, I think, 4 or 5 of us now. All the rest have passed away. And I got pictures of all these guys.
Great. Okay.
I can.
And when you got out of the service and came back to Providence, did you start playing in bands right away, or?
Yeah, I started. It was terrific. I mean, we used to play. They had so many ballrooms over here. We played at the Alhambra Ballroom in Crescent Park. We played at the Palladium Ballroom at Rocky Point. We played at Kimball Starlight Ballroom up in Boston. We played at Roseland Ballroom in Taunton. They had these places all over the place, and it was like busy. I mean, it was filled completely. Canoe Club in East Bridgewater we played. As a matter of fact, half of the band met their wives over there because we played there the longest. We had a long stay there, a couple of years, as a matter of fact. And yeah, it was really a marvelous time, like for music and jazz, especially jazz. And they had Sunday afternoons. You can go to Tootlo's; they'd have a jam session there. You can go to Skelly's Bandbox; they'd have jam sessions there. You can go to the Crown Hotel, and they'd always have announced a Stan Getz or like a Georgie Auld. Flip Phillips became a good friend of mine, and yeah, every time he'd come up to Providence, he used to go up to the factory, and I'd get him a dress for his wife. The dresses in those days used to sell they were expensive dresses those days, $200 in a store. You get them for $35. That was all our cost, for labor. And yeah, and he was like a wonderful guy, very warm, but very naive. I pulled a gag on him one time. I told him I know people that can read your mind over the telephone. So he said, "Get out, No, you can't do that." I said, "Hey, these people can do it." I says, "Watch, you want to, this is at Skelly's Bandbox." So we went over to the bar. I says, "You have a deck of cards?" So he gave me a deck of cards. I says, "Pick out a card." So he picks out a card, like a 4 of spades, we'll say. So I dial a number, right? I dial my sister's house, my sister and brother-in-law. I dial a number, so this is like 12 o'clock. So my brother-in-law says, "Hello." I don't answer. So he knows the gag is on. So he says, 1, 2, 3, 4. I said, "Hello, can I speak to the wizard, please?" So he knows it's a 4. He'll say, "Hearts, diamonds, spades. Hello, wizard? Just a minute, please." So all he hears is, "Can I speak to the wizard?" "Hello, wizard, just a moment." And then I give him the phone. And they say, "Oh, hold the card up to your head," and he's holding it up to his head. You look at the card, put it near your ear. I can see, yeah, I see a black card. The card you're holding is a 4 of spades. He throws the card away. And for years, even after he went down back to Florida, he opened up a club down there, he'd send messages to me. Who is the wizard? He wanted to meet these wizards. And he was something else. This trumpet player, Joey Giorgiani, he was with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. He was. They played down in the club, I guess, that he had down in Florida. And he says, "Jesus, man," he says, "you got a friend down there. All he can do is talk about you, He says, he wants to know who the wizard is." I said, "Flip Phillips, huh?" And then we did a show out in Fall River. They had a ventriloquist, and his dummy was not. He was also a friend of Flip Phillips. That was the dummy's name, Flip Phillips. And we used to louse him up all the time. We put these things in the cigarette. He used to smoke a cigarette while the thing was talking, and the snow would come down. We did all kinds of crazy things. We put some stuff in the water, like salt in the water. He had to drink while the thing was talking. We had itching powder. we screwed up his act so badly, you know, but we all got a kick out of it. That we had a lot of fun in those days. As I mentioned, the Tootlo's, Skelly's Bandbox, Izzy's Club Pyramid. That was way down in South County somewhere. But as a matter of fact, when I was playing at the Port Arthur restaurant, there was a fella, Eddie Regasta, that got into the band with me. You know, we were both younger fellas, and the other guys went into the service. So we would take the hour, we'd fly right down to Izzy's Club Pyramid and catch one set, because they had this saxophone player, Mike Solomon, who is now in a rest home, and believe he's got Alzheimer's. As I went to see him about 6 months ago, he didn't even remember me, and I spent years with helping him because he lost his embouchure. He was a wonderful player. Everybody that came up from New York, Coleman Hawkins, Ben Webster, they all looked for Mickey Solomon because he was that well known. And when I got out of the service, he couldn't play anymore. I said, what happened? He started taking lessons. He had an unnatural embouchure, but it served him the purpose. He got a beautiful sound, and he tried to change it to be more legitimate, and all of the muscles collapsed. And so he couldn't play. And I spent 2 or 3 years trying to help him, go up in the attic with him at his house. He lived right off Wickenden Street. And finally, the only way I got him to play, as soon as he'd get the mouthpiece near his mouth used to screw up, like the muscles would twitch. So I got him an alto saxophone. I brought my alto out, put a mouthpiece on it. I said, try an alto saxophone instead of the tenor saxophone. And so he was able to do that without the twitching. And he started fooling around, and then later on he started doing some gigs, but he never sounded like he did originally. I mean, he was phenomenal. Really something. He was originally a violin player. Yeah. And his brother was considered like the Benny Goodman of Lebanon. He was a wonderful violinist. He used to play all this Lebanese music. And we recorded. I was the drummer. I had a whisk broom and a piece of paper, like a newspaper, and I'm just swishing it, and whacking it. And we made, in those days, they used to use cactus needles and stuff. And we made a little record there, and I don't know if I have it somewhere in the house. But yeah, we had fun in those days. We made everything work. In those days, Georgie Old, Illinois Jaquette, there was trying to remember this guy's name. Matter of fact, he moved, a black fella, he moved to Paris, and he played there for a good number of years. Eddie Lockjaw Davis was another one. The heck is his name? Played a real funky horn. Big guy. I even have records of his. I can't even remember his name. My memory is not right anymore. It's hard for me to recall a lot of these things, But after you leave, I'll think of it,
It's the way it always
Yeah,
works.
right. It's a feel. It's something you feel inside of you. Sometimes you get to learn a certain melody, and you may hear it in a little different way. And so that's when you improvise. Like you take liberties. Actually, you're making another song out of it. There are a lot of songs like Rose Room. They call them in a mellow tone. They made a whole new melody out of it, and this is what they use like for sessions. So if they're playing mellow tone, if you know the other tune, you immediately right with it, A
lot of music.
I can tell you one story that happened at this Skelly's Bandbox. No, I'm sorry, at Tootlo's. They had Flip Phillips come on this one day, like he was the guest star, and I had the band. Well, every sax player in Rhode Island came in. It was in those days like you used to bring your horn and just come in, and the guy said, "Come on up," and maybe sit down and play. Well, we must have had 9 or 10 tenor sax players on the stand with Flip Phillips, and he was a pretty cool guy. He calls me over. He says, "Eddie, come here a minute." He says, "You and I let them play. We'll go to the bar." He says, "Let them knock themselves out." And so we went over to the bar. And the guys are killing, and it'd take like an hour and a half for each guy to take solos, and nobody told them to stop. It's whenever they decided they wanted to stop. But some guys got real greedy, and they go on and on forever. And but I'll never forget like how cool he was about it. He said, "Let them knock themselves out." He says, "We'll go over to the bar," and so we went over to the bar, and that's what we did. But that was like a typical thing. Go to any jam session, bring your horn, you'd sit in. And years later, when I got married, and my wife was from Sweden, when we went to Sweden, it was like that in Sweden years after the bands died and the ballrooms died over here, and it was still alive and well over there. And they had one place we went in, I think it was near Stockholm, and we went to this ballroom, and they had Arnie Domineris with a big band, and he was well known in Sweden. As a matter of fact, he was well known here too, clarinet player. And they had separate rooms. They had a room where they had all the percussions, and sax players used to come in there and sit in. Then they had like guitar players, a room for string instruments. And you can go to any one of these rooms and bring your horn and sit in and have a good time. And I'll tell you something. I heard musicians over there I couldn't believe. They were really, because they actually studied much more there than they did over here. But they still, if you're an American, you're the original. And they appreciate it. Even if you didn't play as well as some of those guys. As I remember sitting in London, we went to a speakeasy place. I met this piano player that played with Ted Heath and befriended him. And he took me around to these speakeasy places that would open up like at midnight. And they have a little sliding thing at the door, and you have to say a password and get in. Ronnie Selby, his name was. And he was a very famous piano player. He used to accompany Vic Damone when he came to this country. And I'd sit in, I was afraid to sit in because these guys were tremendous musicians. And when I sat in, the musicians themselves are applauding me, You're the real thing, like I'm from the United States. I mean, they appreciated American jazz. And you see Louis Armstrong's picture all over the place, in Sweden, in London, everywhere. There was a big difference in those days. I started there in the early 50s, maybe 1950. I think it opened up in 1949, I believe. And we started, they only had a front room at that time. And I remember having, going in one time, and they started off, I believe it was Nat King Cole and his trio. And drew a big crowd. And then the next time they had Sammy Davis Jr. and the Will Maston trio. And he danced, he played drums, he could do anything, this guy. He was amazing. And the business was so good that he enlarged the room, and then they made this big thing, it was like a block long, and he had this big room for the musicians, a big stage. And I worked there with Louis Bellson, Pearl Bailey, Slim Gaillard, Count Basie, and Charlie Ventura. Do you remember him at all? Yeah, I had an incident with him. He didn't like the idea that I had the house band. He didn't blame me, He called me over on the side and he said they shouldn't really hire, if a sax player is coming in to be the guest artist, with his band, they shouldn't have another band, a house band with a sax player. He says, what I'll do is if you take the week off, he says, and I'll pay your salary. I said, well, I can't do it unless I get permission from Paul Filippi, So I went over to Paul. I said, Charlie doesn't want me to play for the week. But he was playing a bass saxophone in those days. He was a tenor sax player and a wonderful sax player. I have records of him, And he was playing this bass saxophone, and he's leaving, like there was no kick in there. It's just a dark sound, and he couldn't really honk away, And I'd get up with the band and I'd tear the house down because I'm playing all and there people are going like this. So he says, no, he says, if he wants the week off, he takes the week off. You stay here. He says, he's not going to pay you to stay out, So, and the funny part about it, when I was talking to him, we were sitting at the bar. This is in the afternoon. I look at this drummer that he was setting up. I said, Jesus, this guy looks familiar. And his name was Tiny Khan. Now, Tiny Khan was like a wonderful arranger, big time, played with Getz, played with all these guys and recorded with them. And I said, but this guy, I know him, right? And then it hits me. Little Normie Khan, when we were like in grammar school, there was this little fat kid, and it was like a friend of mine, and I was a good baseball player. So I was a captain of the baseball team. So I put him on the team and put him out in right field where not too many shots went out, just to have him feel like he's part of a team. And his name was Norman Kahn. So I said, I know this guy. I said, I went to school with him when we were in grammar school. He says, I'll tell you what, he says, I'll call him over. He says, and see if he recognizes you. So he says, don't say anything. He says, Tiny, come on over a minute. He says, I want to talk to you about something. So he puts the drums down, and he was a big guy. He was a monster. He takes one look at me, comes over to me, picks me up. Eddie Zaretsky, he put me down. He remembered all these years because I was, kind to him and put him on the baseball team, and he knew he wasn't an athlete at all. But what a music talent he was, unbelievable. So that was another incident that was like unbelievable for me. I played with, well, not at the Celebrity Club. I played with Getz in the band in the Bronx. Ernie Tactile in his orchestra, and it was just a bunch of kids. And Milt Bernhardt was a famous trombone player, played with Kenton, I believe, and he was in the band. And Bob Ditz, his real name was Zaretsky, and he became famous afterwards. And one other trumpet player, Donnie Light, he became like one of these jazz players on 52nd Street. There was all the clubs there. And Stan Getz, as a matter of fact, on my honeymoon, we were in Paris on the way to Sweden to visit my wife's folks. And we looked at the Paris edition of the New York Times, and I see that Zoot Sims is playing. And I had worked with Zoot Sims a few places, and I knew that he would remember me, so we decided to go to see him. So my wife and I went to this club where he was, and I'm walking in the door, and who's coming out of the door? Stan Getz. And we take a double take, Hey, God, he couldn't remember my name. I said, Eddie Zaretsky. Oh, Eddie Zaretsky. Of course, he knew my cousin, Lester Kessner. He knew there was that whole band, that Ernie Tactile's band. In those days, he had a lot of trouble with his embouchure. He used to squeak a lot. But he was also a guitar player, so he knew all his changes and stuff. And but he was a great guy. And then I met him. We called him up in Sweden. He gave me a telephone number. He was living in Sweden, in Denmark at the time. He married a Swedish girl, Monica. And we decided we were going to buy our furniture in Denmark. So we went from Sweden after we met the folks and everything. We went to Denmark to purchase some furniture there, and we were going to ship it home on a boat. So we called up Monica and Stan, and they told us where we should go to shop and like the best places to shop, and that's what we did. And we bought our furniture there, and we shipped it home. And he went home the following day. That I went home on a Sunday, and he went home on a Monday, and I flew home. He went on a ship with all the stuff that he was bringing back home. He came back to the States. And then I bumped into him one other time in I think it was a Downbeat Club or some club in New York. They had two bands. They had Stan Getz, featuring Stan Getz. It was the time he made that album, Focus. You remember that? Right. And John Coltrane was the second band on. And when he came over with me, I bought him a drink. We're sitting at the bar. Coltrane started playing. I said, "What the heck is that?" I says, "I don't know what the heck this guy is playing." He said, "You want to know something? I don't understand it either." Because Coltrane was out of his mind at that time. Oh God, it was unbelievable, but it wasn't like the kind of music that would, you couldn't whistle something after he played, or hum it. I always say, every time I hear bebop, I say, "Hum me a few bars, will you?" But yeah, so we were pretty friendly in those days. It was nice, like, to know these people, you know. And yeah, there was I played with Cat Anderson. There was the screech trumpet player that was with either Duke Ellington's band. Paul Gonzalas. I sat in with him at some small club downtown that was right near a hotel, a very small hotel. And his cousin was a good buddy of mine. Matter of fact, I have him on a record, on a CD. His name was George Meso. That was Paulie Gonzalez' cousin. So we'd always get together, you know, like when Paulie was in town, and everybody would come down, all the guys, to see him, because he was a magnificent player, you know.
So let's pick it up. Maybe if you could talk about Paul Filippi a little bit.
Yeah, okay. All right. Paul Filippi was a terrific guy to work for. I mean, one of the best. He knew his business. He was a businessman, just naturally. You know, actually, he was what do you call it? A doorman at the Crown Hotel. And but he had this business sense. So he finally, when he opened up the club, he knew how to make it progress. He just did the right thing. He hired the right people. He surrounded himself with the right people. Got good advice. Knew when to stop. Knew when to do it. And as time went on, it got bigger and bigger. And to a time, it was like the best, one of the best in the country, the club. And he was an easygoing guy, but I mean, he knew what he wanted. You know, he was a businessman. But he'd greet everybody at the door. He'd go to tables. He'd walk over and smack you on the back. Hey, brother. He'd call everybody brother. And yeah, he was, like, when I say naive, Pearl Bailey broke all kinds of records. You know, matter of fact, I was playing with Louis Bellson, and we had. I was born in Brooklyn, 1924, and I moved to the Bronx, I believe, when I was about 13 years old, and that's when when I was 14, my father bought me my saxophone, my first saxophone. I know that looks like it, but it isn't. It was older than that one, and but my cousin actually was a saxophone player, and I just thought it was really nice, and he showed me how the fingering on the saxophone, told me what the notes were. But he wouldn't let me play and blow on the mouthpiece, you know. So I would put my arms around him, and he'd just finger it, and he would be blowing on it, and we'd be playing little tunes, you know. So as time went on, my father decided that looked pretty cute, and he thought I had a feel for the thing, you know. So he bought me the instrument, and I took lessons from a fellow by the name of Eddie Small. I took about 6 lessons. And he used to play in a burlesque house down in Manhattan. But he was a pretty good teacher. But I thought I learned more by myself. I used to listen to the radio a lot. They used to have a program called Make Believe Ballroom. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And they have like 15-minute segments of different bands. And I'd be peeled to that every day. And I learned to play a lot of tunes, you know, in those days. Anyway, I wanted to learn enough tunes so I can go to work, you know, like I can try to get a job. I didn't really know how to read too well. But somebody told me if you went to the Brill Building down in New York City in Manhattan, that's where they auditioned for summer jobs up in the Catskill Mountains. So, like, as stupid as I was in those days, you know, I didn't have any more brains to realize that I didn't know enough. But I went down there, hung around with my sax, and stayed out in front of the building. And sure enough, a guy comes up and says, "Are you a sax player?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "My sax man didn't show up for an audition." He says, "You want to audition with us?" "Yeah, sure." So up you go, and he pulls out some music, and I says, "I don't really read, you know." So he said, "What do you mean?" I says, "I can't read. You know, I could a little bit, but not enough to read a tune, you know." So he says, he asked me, he said, "Do you know any tunes by heart?" So I knew 3 tunes. I knew by Mir Bis Duchesne, Tuxedo Junction, and Heart and Soul. And so we auditioned with that, and we got the job. We got $7 a week, room and board at the Rainbow Lodge. That was up in Livingston Manor, way up, right near Ithaca. And after a few weeks, things weren't going that good, so they cut us from $7 to $5 a week. But we had a ball. I mean, we learned a lot. Like they fired the act that we had. We had an MC and like a host, and we had a singer. And for some reason or other, I guess they didn't get along. They had an argument, and they fired them. So we put on the skits. Like we learned some of the skits. But it was funny because we had a drummer that stuttered. He was a good drummer, you know, but he couldn't pronounce anything with a W or a V. It'd be, you know. And he was part of the skit. And he'd have a punchline occasionally, you know. And they had what I don't know if you're familiar with blackout skits. You know, like you'd say the punchline and the curtains, the stage goes dark and the curtains close, and then everybody is applauding and it opens and we take bows. And he would be going, and the curtains would close, the lights would go out, and then they put the lights out, the curtains would open again, because he was still stuttering. Couldn't get the words out. But people enjoyed that, and he became like a comic, you know. And so that was my first experience, like in the Catskill Mountains. Then we worked for another couple of years in different hotels. And all my buddies had a job in one of the hotels, so Monday night was our night off, and we'd always hitchhike. Of course, we didn't drive in those days. We were like 14, 15 years old. And we'd go to see one another and hang around and find out, like, see what their hotel looked like. And it was like a tremendous time of my life. And then finally, my father moved to Providence to open up this other business that he got out of the manufacturing business in New York. And he opened up a contracting business in Warren. And then I got to learn a lot of things, like Charlie Barnett would be playing, and Johnny Hodges. And there was a band, Bal Merce and his band. And they heard that I played like Charlie Barnett, and they used to do a lot of his arrangements. And there was a dance hall called the Swedish Hall. That was where the theater is on Weybosset Street. There used to be a theater way up. And the Swedish Hall was upstairs. So they invited me to sit in with the band. And the first thing they pulled out was a song called Tappin' at the Tapper. And they gave me the solo to play, and of course I knew it by heart. And they were flipping out, you know, and I met a lot of the guys. And little by little, I started working with different people and doing gigs. And then when the war started, a lot of the older fellas were being drafted. And so I got hired to play at the Port Arthur restaurant. They were looking for sax players. They had 4 saxes over there. And I ended up doing 3 shows a day. We worked from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock doing a show and play for, you know, lunchtime music. Then we come back and play from 6 to 8 with another show. We'd have an hour off and come back and play from 9 to 1. 7 days a week. For 7 months I did that. And we used to play shows, you know, so that I really learned how to read there. And then I enlisted in the Army because I knew I was going to be drafted. And so a whole bunch of us got together. They were looking for a band to go down to Otis Air Base down in the Cape. And Major Crane was the head of the 14th Anti-Submarine Squadron. And he wanted a band because his mother owned the Coon and Messert Club. And they used to have the officers' dances there all the time. So he decided he wanted to get a band so that they could have a band for every Saturday night. So a fellow that knew all the musicians in Providence told him, he says he thinks he can get the guys together. So I got a call one day, and we met at the Crown Hotel, and this lieutenant came up from Otis Air Base, and they had staff cars, and they took us down to the Cape, and they showed us the place. And they did that about 4 or 5 times, and the last time we were there, they said, raise your right hand, and they swore us in right then and there. And I called my folks up. I says, I'm in the Army, I'm in the Air Force. She said, what are you talking about? Aren't you coming home for dinner? I said, no, they sent us up to Fort Devens to be processed. And then we got back, they requisitioned us, and we got back to Otis Air Base, and that's what we did. And it so happened the mess sergeant was a piano player, and we didn't have a piano player, so he became part of the band. So we got up anytime we wanted. We go to the mess hall, we get steak, eggs, whatever we wanted. But that didn't last too long. After a while, we all had a job to do. One was doing parachutes, and another guy was in the armament section. I was working in headquarters. And we lasted there, I think it was about close to 12 months. And we got a new commanding officer, the one that we had, this Major Crane. He got shipped out to Winged Headquarters in New York. So this guy that came in, Major Horner, I think he was something to do with the first Middle East war that they had when George Bush's father, George W. father, he was a big, at that time I guess he was a general, Horner. And he was a young guy, fresh out of West Point, and he didn't like musicians. He called a meeting in the mess hall at 1300. That's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And we get in there, and he's standing up on top of a table, and he was like a big guy. He was about 6'3", 6'4", you know. He looked like God standing up there. He says, I want all the musicians to come down here in front of me. So there was 13 of us that enlisted together. So we all go down, and he says, I'm going to ship you guys out. He says, well, the infantry, wherever, get rid of you. We don't want musicians here. He said, we want soldiers here. So anyway, he did. He sent 3 guys out, a bass player, this Joe Caludia, this friend of mine, Ani Sharlop, and was one other guy, I don't remember who that was. But I went down to Winged Headquarters in New York. I got a weekend pass, and I went down there on a Friday. And I went to Winged Headquarters because I knew he was there, you know. And they wouldn't even let me in the building, but I talked to the guard that they had outside the door. And I said, I got to talk to him, even if on the phone, you know. He said, well, they have a phone in the desk. I'll let you go to the desk. He says, and have them call up Major Crane. So I called up, I had him call up Major Crane. And he answered the phone, and I told him, I says, my name is Ed Zaretsky, and I'm one of the musicians that you requested with the band. I said, this Major Horner is sending, guy 3 was already shipped out to the infantry. I said, he's going to get rid of all of us. He said, well, I'll tell you what to do. He says, send me all the names of all the musicians, including the 3 that were shipped out, their serial numbers. He says, and I'll take care of the rest. So he says, teletype it to me. So I guess he gave me, I don't recall what we did, but we had a teletype, and we teletyped it to him. And after a month or so, we got the following enlisted personnel to report to Fort Dix as a regular Army Air Force band, and you know, like an authentic band, you know, and to await the arrival of a warrant officer. And that's what we did. We went down there, and we were walking around. They gave us basic training with mops and brooms because they didn't have guns for us. And it was kind of a joke. I mean, they used to see us walking around, everybody be laughing at the air base there. But it was quite an experience.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
When you got out of the service then, did you...
Thought about it. And hey, you're pretty hip. This guy knows it. It's good to be able to talk to somebody who knows all these things, you know. But so you can appreciate. But when it came to the klezmer music, that brought back like my family. Like when we used to go to weddings and things, there was one part of my family that they were into this stuff, and they'd get everything going, and they'd go crazy. I mean, they would dance, and one was a professional dancer. But it brought me back to those days. I was seeing it. You remember when they were doing like the jitterbug stuff, and
Sure, yeah.
and then when the big bands were playing at the Paramount Theater, I was one of the crowd, and I used to bunk school, play hooky with my cousin Lester. We used to go down to Manhattan and stand in line for hours to get into the Paramount Theater. And I'll never forget when Benny Goodman's band was on, they had a pit that was way down below the stage level. It was like in the cellar. The band used to get on over there, and all of a sudden the lights would go out after the movies, and then all of a sudden the spotlights would go on, and you'd hear the theme song, and here comes, they're playing Let's Dance, and the band comes up, right up, and oh my God, you talk about excitement. Oh, it was incredible. So I wanted her to see these, that time, that era, you know, was unbelievable. We thought Elvis was big and the Beatles were big. In those days, it was big all over, you know, and it was always that way.
Elvis didn't do 8 shows a day, though.
Right. That's right. I really didn't have a relationship with Paul. I just knew him to say hello, you know, and he would be in. Of course, I was friendly with George Azevedo. Matter of fact, George was instrumental in getting me a terrific job at a black club in Pawtucket called Leo's, and they needed a band, and he was working somewhere else, so he suggested that I come in there because we played a very similar style, although he had the best sound I ever heard on tenor saxophone, better than Ben Webster. Oh, this guy was marvelous. If you want, I can play part of a tape there, a CD that I have of him, and that was done. This is of me and him and a few other guys. Bob Pelosi's on it, Mike Marr is on it, all my buddies, and this was done in the middle '50s, about '54, something like that. And even then, he got a tone that was just incredible. And so Georgie, he gave me this job in Leo's, as I said, and I was making, in those days, $150 a week they're giving me. And, you know, I'm paying the guys, you know, we had like a price for the whole band. And my cut of it was $150, and in those days, it's like doing a gig at night over here and getting $500, you know. And the people loved the band. They were nice as could be to me. They were really tremendous. And I was telling you about the Bai-Kai Pew, that was a league that they had with all the African-American players were in. And they invited me to play in their tournaments. So I used to go with this Howie Cruz, who was George Yerujo's trainer, and we'd go to Bridgeport, Connecticut, we'd go to Hartford, Connecticut. We'd be playing in all these tournaments, and they wine and dine me, because I used to teach them golf at Middlebrook. And then I had a thing that the owner of the club was a buddy of mine, Merrill Lovett. Do you remember Raw Lovett, the Mickey Mouse lawyer?
No, I don't.
Oh, he was the biggest lawyer in Rhode Island, and he was eccentric, and he didn't start out that way. He had a motorcycle accident. After that, forget it. This guy grew a beard like this. He started, everything that he put on was a Mickey Mouse. He'd have sailor uniforms on. He'd have Mickey Mouse over here, but he was like the most brilliant lawyer of all. And Merrill bought this club out there, and he was but as a matter of fact, they bought the house for me. Raw Lovett let me know when this house went on auction, and Merrill, who used to be in the contracting business, he bid for the house. He knew how to bid, you know, and they got me the house. So one day we were playing, and he was a hacker. I used to try to give him some lessons. So the guy said that I could probably pick one club and beat Merrill, playing him even. So Merrill says, I don't think he can with one club. I said, not only that, I said, mine. I called him a week before he passed away. And yeah, we played in the same band with the Dukes Band for 20 years. And yeah, I knew him from 1940 something when I enlisted in the Army. I knew Arthur. Right. Al Conti, yeah. Al Conti, my daughter knows Al Conti. His brother, he was also with the Youth Philharmonic or something. He used to conduct it. Violin player, and Al was a piano player. And he went to New York. He played one of the theaters there with a big band. He was on the road with a big band. Yeah, I knew Al very well. Frankie Rayo, yeah. Frankie Rayo, yeah. He was an old timer. He used to come down to Bovie's all the time. And for some reason or other, all these young kids that are coming out of Berkeley, he says, you know something? He says, I don't understand what the hell they're doing out there. He says, you I can understand. You know, he was like a fan of mine. And he was, I think he played trumpet or trombone. He was a brass player. But he was a nice guy. He's always had a smile on his face, a very, very easygoing guy. The first guy I met when I moved in from New York, went to Hope High School. I got into the band. Porky I met him in the band locker room, and we got real friendly. I used to go up to his house. His mother used to make me a chocolate cake, Zalman cone. And then we worked I worked with the Jules Dixon for 2 years, and I took Peter Pilligin's place when he, clarinet. So I played tenor sax and I played the soprano in those days. And Porky was a terrific guy, wonderful guy. As a matter of fact, when I was stationed at Fort Dix, I'd get a weekend pass, and I'd go when he was playing with Charlie Barnett's band. You couldn't get a hotel room during the war days. I mean, everything was filled up, no matter what. So I'd always call Porky or wait for him backstage, and I'd stay in his hotel room. I'd sleep on the floor, like we'd put a mattress on the floor or something, or get a cot, and always be with him, But I have to tell you a funny story. They're playing. There was an act called High, Low, and Stanley. High was a big, tall guy. He was close to 7 feet tall. Low, high, low, a regular sized guy, and Stanley was a midget. And they do this act, and the midget's running between their legs, like all kinds of crazy stuff. And so the act was on, and this is at the Strand Theater in New York City, which is like the Paramount. And so I'm standing, and I got a Garrison cap on. It's the one with the peak, and I got the emblem, like the lyre over here. And I see Charlie Bennett keep on looking and looking and looking, And I see guys getting off, while they're doing the act, I see guys getting off the bandstand and going off on the other wing. They had bought a supply of marijuana, and they thought I was a fuzz, they said. Because when they came out after the show was over, and they're all coming off stage, the curtains are closed, they're looking at me and they're giving me this evil look, like, what's this? What? And Porky says, oh no. He says, don't tell me. He says, they thought the cops were here, and they had just bought a batch of stuff from, and so they went to flush it down the toilet. They sent the guys upstairs to the dressing rooms, putting it under the snow on the windowsills. I said, I'm just standing here. I don't know what the hell's going on, But I mean, Porky was a good friend of mine.
That's a good story. But I was going to talk about Porky as a musician a little bit.
Yeah, Porky played like J.C. Higginbottom. He was the old, blasting, real gutty sound, guttural sound, I should say. And terrific ears. He really didn't know that much about chord changes, and but he wouldn't miss a beat. A tremendous rhythm feeling, and he'd play. They'd always feature him on "Hold That Tiger," "Hold That Tiger," and but I mean he could do anything. And he was with Benny Goodman's band. I saw him with Artie Shaw's band. I saw him with Charlie Barnett's band, with Lucky Millender's band. He used to play up in Harlem all the time. Yeah, he'd been around quite a bit. And I missed the chocolate cakes when he was away.
You know him?
Who's that? Oh, Joey Esposito?
Yeah.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I had him as a substitute for me. When my wife got sick, I was taking a lot of time off at Bovie's. And so I'd get either Eddie Tomasi or Joey Esposito to fill in for me. And he's now teaching, I think, in a high school or somewhere. As a matter of fact, not too long ago, I was in a hardware store, and I got talking to this kid. I was looking for something. I don't recall what it was. But he called over the manager, and the manager went look for. So while we got talking about music, I don't know if he had a sax strap on him. I said, "Well, you play saxophone?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, I'm a musician too." So Joey Esposito was his teacher, and so we got talking about him. But that's really, I don't know him that well. He was a younger guy. Another guy, Scotty. I got a call when I came back from Sweden. I had gone to Sweden on my honeymoon. And when I got back, I get a call from this fellow, Nicky Peters, who used to play like Ben Webster, in that style. He had a fruit store in Attleboro, and he was a good buddy of mine. He played with me in New York when I met my wife with the big band. We played at the Roseland Ballroom. And Nicky and I had, the big three was Mike Solomon and Nicky Peters and myself. In those days, we were the three big tenor players in the state of Rhode Island. And as the years went on, we got to know, we played together, we did everything. And I stopped, and he died of cancer. While he was dying, he was calling me because he heard my wife had breast cancer, and he was concerned about my wife. And he was a good guy, I had a lot of fun with him, a lot of laughs. And he was Albanian, and he had all these. He and Mike Solomon were good buddies, because one was Lebanon and Lebanese, and the other one was Albanian. But they had the same kind of food, and he used to eat kibbis. You know what that is, right? They used to have the Syrian bread and put kibbis in it. Yeah, I had a lot of fun with these guys.
Did you play with Scott Hamilton? Or?
Yeah, well, I got to get back to Scott Hamilton. So I got a call from Nicky Peters, and he says, "You just got back from Sweden?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "You got to come with me." He says, I said, "What?" He said, "I want you to hear the sax player." I says, "Hey, Nicky." I said, "Nick," I said, "at this point in my life, I wouldn't go across the street to hear Benny Goodman anymore. This is later years." He says, "You got to hear this guy. Believe me," he says, "trust me." He says, "I want you to hear this guy." He says, "He is the reincarnation of every great saxophone player you ever heard." I said, "Where's he playing?" He says, "Downtown Providence in a place called Joe's Upstairs." I said, "All right." So he picks me up, and we go down there, Joe's Upstairs. And I walk in there, and he's got the group. He's got Chris Flory or whatever, the drummer. I can't even remember the other guy's name. He had a bass player that was with him for a long time. He had a guitar player that was very shy. He was 7 feet tall. I thought he was standing on a stage. I see this guitar player, and they played great, But I hear this kid playing the saxophone. I can't believe it. I mean, you can see what a talent this kid is. I mean, it was just amazing. And every time he'd end a tune, everybody would stop, and he'd still fiddle around and noodle, and finally ended out the way he wanted to. But you can tell he made all the changes and everything. So I befriended him. He came over. He was introduced to me, and we got friendly. He had no money, so I used to bring him reeds, boxes of reeds, Like if the reeds were too stiff, I can tell by looking at a light. I put them in, and I bring him boxes of reeds. And he was so thankful. And then we used to trade mouthpieces and try different things. And I knew him for years. I used to go down to New York when I told him to go up to sit in with Roy Eldridge, because I had to work with Roy Eldridge also. And Roy Eldridge was up in Bedford, Mass, or someplace up there. It was along the coast, just before you get into New Hampshire. And I said, "We're playing at some club over there." I said, "Bring your horn," I said, "and go sit in. Tell him you know me, Well, he did that. Roy Eldridge heard him and couldn't believe his ears. Calls up Prestige Records, because Roy used to record with Prestige Records. Calls up some officials over there, some executive there, tells them about Scotty. So they said, "Get him out of here, get him out there." So anyway, he tells him his father, I guess, was an art teacher or something in RISD. So they banked him a little bit, gave him some money. He went out to California, went to the record place. They signed him up right away. And then he started playing and brought the whole group with him, with the exception of the tall, shy kid that played wonderful guitar. The next time I see him, he's a guard at one of the stores. What was that store that was across from where Davenport is? That big store that used to, it was like a department store.
Zaire?
Yeah, Zaire's. He was a guard at Zaire's. Yeah, he was a nice guy, a nice kid. I felt bad for him because he was so self-conscious about his height. And but Scotty and I were very friendly, and I've been out of touch with him for years now.
Yeah, I guess he lives in London now.
Does he? He was married to a Japanese girl at the time.
Yeah, he did an album with Flip Phillips, right?
Pardon?
I think he did an album with Flip Phillips as well.
Yeah, I think he did. Yeah.
How about Dave McKenna?
Yeah, Dave. I can tell you a funny story about Dave. He was a bad drunk, and at one time he was like an alcoholic. So we were playing we were rehearsing a big band I had a big band, and we used to rehearse at the Village Rendezvous years ago. Now we're on Snow Street in some small club, and this Quigley, Bob Quigley, I think, or something, he took over the band. So he's got Dave McKenna playing on the spinet piano up on the stage, right? The band's sitting down like near the bar. And he got drunk, and he didn't like what we were playing or whatever. Anyway, you know how big a guy he was. His knees were touching the part of the spinet piano, so he goes like this, and he goes up on his toes, and he knocks the piano right off the stage. He was just mad. And when he got mad, I used to take him out golfing. Art Pelosi was a nut for golf. When we were down on the Cape, there was a Tony, a singer that we used to be with Dick Johnson and Lou Colombo, and Tony something or other, Tanya fellow. Beautiful voice, a real nice kid, a gentleman, crazy about golf. So I took Dave McKenna, he and Art Pelosi, and I used to give him lessons and go out and play golf. Yeah, all my buddies, all these guys. Yeah, we first started at this Howie Fink's place, the Cobblestone Inn. That was the first job that we had with as a matter of fact, we even played the Kirkbride Country Club, was really the first job that Duke got the band together. And then we started at the Cobblestone Inn. This Howie Fink wanted us every week. As a matter of fact, one night some guys busted into us, 7 cars, stole instruments and everything, or golf clubs. And we played over there, and we had Charlie Shavers, and we had some of the great stars come up and sit in with the band. Who's the guy that scat sings once in a while, the trumpet player?
Clark Terry?
Clark Terry. Yeah, he was up there. And Flip Phillips, we had a lot of guys. And then from there, we went into Bovie's. And because I played at Bovie's with different guys, I played with this organ player. The guy was real funny. He used to come out. He had like an organ that he could make believe it's. He would put something on and it would play automatically. The keys used to go down. It was his own organ. He used to bring it with him. We're playing at the Farm Supper Club. So he's playing in one room, and I'm playing with Art Tancredi in the other room. And we go in the other room. He's like this behind the piano, behind the organ, and the thing is playing. And he's singing. But he was a funny guy. And I used to work with him down at Bovie's. And it was a kick because he played good jazz, Then I worked with the Jewels of Dixieland. And then I had my own band with Porky. He was in my band. I had Eddie Souza on piano. I had Eddie Matty on bass. Yeah, Bovie's like, in those days it was like kind of smoky and small. But it did business like on Monday nights especially. And the Fridays and Saturdays you had different kind of groups in there. Like more like rock and roll and stuff. But I worked there for years and years. As a matter of fact, the old man, John Bovie, the father of the guy that's running it now, and his name is John also. He was a card nut. He used to play gin rummy. And he knew I like to play gin rummy at the club. To play it like all the time at the golf course. So if it was a slow night, he'd go he had a back room and he had a table there. He'd open the door. He says, "Tony, send Eddie in." He says, Tony, he said, "What do you want?" He says, "Let him come in here. I want to play cards." And Tony said, "Go ahead." I said, "No, I don't want to." He said, "Go ahead." So I used to go there and we'd play like head to head all the time. Yeah, anytime it was slow, that I'd go in the back with John Bovie. And I got to know all the waitresses were my buddies and his son. I got to know his son very well. I bumped into him, I guess it was about a month ago. I think it was CVS drugstore or someplace. But yeah, John, the Bovies was, then they enlarged the place and to accommodate the big band. That's when they started with the big bands. George Meso was a beautiful player, like sweet. He had a wonderful sound. He was more like the Tommy Dorsey, what's his name? He was a band leader, played beautiful trombone also. And like Bill Harris. Bill Harris, I remember Bijou? But he was smoother than Bill Harris. Bill Harris had like a bigger vibrato, like, when he was playing. Yeah, he was just a very, he knew a lot of tunes, a good jazz player, and but I mean he never prostituted the horn. He never like blared out or anything. Everything was a good sound, you know. Always played good taste. Mikey Marr was an all-around. He recorded with me in 1955. I've got the CD over here. I've got Art Pelosi on baritone sax, and Mikey Marr. Mikey Marr was a very efficient. He learned a lot from Art Pelosi because they had the group together. And Art Pelosi was like one in a million. I mean, he was a real. He played guitar, he played a little piano, he played bass. A very talented guy. The only thing that was against him is he always had a rough sound. He was like a diamond in the rough. And if he had gone to New York and probably got with some of the big name guys, he would have made it big. He would have, because he was that kind of talent. And actually he could get a good sound. Only the style he played didn't allow him to get a good sound. You know, and then he was influenced also when these new kids started to come out of Berkeley. Same thing with Dick Johnson. Matter of fact, I even had not an argument with Dick, but I mean, I kind of as like just to tell him that he had to know what I felt inside. I took him aside one night at Bovie's. I said, "What the hell are you trying to prove?" I says, "You're a master at playing. I mean, the guy is just phenomenal. I mean, you're talking about like all kinds of talent on clarinet, soprano sax, alto sax, tenor. You know, I could take or leave it, but he was a master. Flute, beautiful flute player. Play any tune. He play any style. He can play a wedding. He could play schmaltzy music. He can play fantastic jazz. He had ears like it wouldn't stop. You know, like." And now he's trying to play like these kids, like this real, like 1,000 notes. I says, "It sounds like you got a plug up your ass." I says, "Yeah, somebody stuck the plug in there." Anyway, he said, "Well," I says, I'm experimenting." I said, "Experiment?" I says, "You're a master of what you do. Stay with your style. Let them play your style if they want. You can't play their stuff. They come out of Berkeley. It's a whole different school of feeling, you know." And finally, years later, he finally decided. I got so many things that he gave me, tapes and CDs with. Every time, as a matter of fact, I might see him Friday too. He'd give me, open the trunk of the car. Here's another CD, and I got all these CDs of he and Dave McKenna, and so he smartened up, and now he's playing much more legitimate, and he's a master at that, you know. And what the heck, Artie Shaw heard him, said that he was the greatest clarinet player he's ever heard, and that's why he chose him to take over the band. As a matter of fact, he just got back from a long trip that he went. He went to South America, he went to Japan, on the road with the band. And yeah, and he's a terrific guy, a real funny guy. I used to look forward to Monday nights because either I'd have jokes for him or he'd have jokes for me, and we'd sit there and kill ourselves. He was like, he came out with always classic jokes that you'd remember for the rest of your life. And he's just a wonderful guy. Hal Crook was a very serious musician. You know, he liked a good time, but I mean, on his own terms. But when he was around music and he was playing or writing, everything was straight ahead. He wasn't one. He wasn't a mingler. He wasn't that friendly with people. You knew him and you were acquainted with him. But I mean, there was never like a buddy, because he was much younger than all the guys that I know. Duke, I remember him when he was 6 years old. I used to work with Ray, his father. And I remember when he first started playing drums, and I remember his sister was playing xylophones. I remember his mother, the original, his mother, Duke's mother, because Ray divorced her and then remarried. And the second wife finally passed away. I think it was about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, Gladys. And as I said, most of these guys met their wives in the canoe club in East Bridgewater. And that's where Ray met this Gladys, and where most of the guys that I know that married girls from there. And what else would you like to know about that?
I was thinking, I don't know much about Ray Belaire. Anything you could tell us?
Ray was a real gentleman. He bought the Arcadia Ballroom. He
Where was the Arcadia?
The Arcadia was downtown on. You got Weybosset, and then you got Westminster. What's the last one? Where the Strand Theater used to be. It was.
I think it was around.
Washington Street? No.
Streets.
Yeah, wait a minute. I think it is Washington Street. It was on Washington. You had Washington Street, and then you had Westminster Street, and then you had Weybosset Street, right? So it used to be on Weybosset Street, not what did you just say? Washington Street, and it was upstairs on the 4th floor, right? You used to take an elevator to go up there, or you could walk the stairs if you wanted. And it was right next door to the Strand Theater. And I remember, where I worked there for years and years and years when Ray took it over. Ray became one of the big booking agents in town. He used to book dances in the Roseland Ballroom in Taunton. He knew Rose, whatever her name was, Rose Cohen. Or so. I knew that the woman and her husband, he died, and then she ran it, and then she ran it with Ray, and then Ray took it over there when she passed away. And so he was running things all over the place, started booking like pretty good. And real gentleman, used to come up here Friday nights and we used to play cards, as I said before. And yeah, he was always dressed. I never saw him without a shirt and tie. And when he got ill, that he passed away from nephritis, kidney disease. And he come down to the driving range. He knew something was wrong with him, but he didn't know what. But he would sit there in the sun, and it was like in the middle of summer. He'd have a shirt and tie on. He was always dressed. I've got pictures of him too. And I walked over to him one day. I was giving a lesson. He was just sitting there and watching me. I walked over. I took his tie off. I said, "Open your shirt and get some sun." I says, "Go out and buy a golf shirt." I says, "Don't ever come up here dressed like that." Jesus, man, relax a little bit, Yeah, well, I wasn't feeling good, he said, but, he just wasn't used to being like casual. He always had to be dressed. And, but he was a wonderful guy. I mean, I loved him. He was a wonderful man, very handsome, and very likable, just a terrific guy. He didn't know that much about music, although he did play violin at one time when he was younger. But he would sometimes kick off the wrong tempo. We were playing, I think it was a tune that had a lot of notes in it. And he doesn't realize it. And he says, 1, 2, 3, 4. I said, whoa, wait a minute. What are you doing? And we went, we're playing all over the place. Yeah, he didn't realize sometimes he would give the wrong tempo. He'd say, "How does this one go?" And I go, 1, 2, 3. But he always he looked good, always in front of the band. He had a baton. He was like the old timer, a really nice guy. Yeah. Artie Cabral was a terrific drummer. Really, he played with Mike Renzi. He played with all these big. Every time a big star would come in, he would be like the drummer that they would call, and he was like a very modern drummer. A lot of things going on while he's playing. He's not just one to keep a tempo. He's always like filling in. He's doing matter of fact, he wasn't that good for a big band. He was good for a group. He sat in a few times with taking Deuce place. He never really made it, and he had trouble with it. He wouldn't admit it, and I'm sure that he's a much seasoned musician. He probably can play with the symphony, but he had trouble with a big band style, but he was, for a group, he was wonderful. Gregor Body, I tell you, when he first joined the band at Bovie's, he was a scared kid. You could tell he had talent, but what happened, every time he had to take a solo, he'd get up there and he'd go like, he'd stand there and his fingers wouldn't move. And he was like, he'd lock up, he'd grimace, he couldn't play. And he called me up, he said, "What the hell am I doing? And what kind of mouthpiece are you using? What should I be using?" And I took him aside and I used to talk to him and talk to him and talk to him. So you could have got up there, just cool it, like you're trying to play too many notes, you're thinking too hard, you're trying to do too much at once. Just cool down a little bit, Play easy. Just play easy. And then I don't see him like he went on his own, like I started with a group. Then the next thing I know, this guy is getting big time, and now he's like really big time. He's all over the world. He goes all over the world. And yeah, he's a good musician. He plays all the instruments. Well, I know he played terrific flute when he was younger, and played wonderful soprano sax and a terrific alto sax player. So yeah, Greg Abadi is a very, very talented musician.
Okay, a couple more questions.
A few small local jazz shows. I listen to Boston, usually WGBH. It starts at like 8 o'clock at night. You get Eric Jackson. And then after that, I listen to, I don't get to bed until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. I have insomnia. So I listen to all these guys, you know, Bob Palosha, and the whole slew of guys. I got their names written and their telephone numbers. I used to call them up and request tunes. They had a guy from Bulgaria playing clarinet, and I called until I finally got the DJ that played that thing. There was a guy by the name of Ivo Papasov, and he played clarinet, and it sounded like 3 clarinets at one time. But I mean, this guy wouldn't miss a beat, and speed, and the whole band was like that. He had a tenor sax, he had an accordion, he had this most fantastic drummer, and he had, you'd have to hear this group. It's called Ivo Papasov and his Wedding Band. And I never heard anything like it. As a matter of fact, I cut a record I had Sally make another CD, and I gave it to Dick Johnson to listen to because he's a terrific clarinet player. But it was a style, and they even had a singer in the band that sang. It's something they do with their throats so that the notes sound like, you know, like it comes out like a multi-sounds, and that's the way they play. But technique, it's unbelievable.
How about, do you remember Fred Grady?
Oh, sure.
Let's talk about him.
Yeah, Little Darlin'. Yeah, there's a theme song. He used to come on with that. Freddie was an alcoholic, real easygoing guy. He had a beautiful voice. He'd speak so beautifully, and he was a good disc jockey. He played the tunes. He always knew the right things to play. He'd even play tunes where a guy would narrate a poem or something like, and be with music background, and you'd get in the mood. Anytime you listen to the station he was on, you'd be right in the mood to listen to all this kind of stuff. It would like knock you out. Sometimes I used to come home from a job, and I got Fred Grady on. I can't get out of the car. I have to keep listening. He was wonderful, and I saw him just a few weeks before he passed away. Yeah, he used to come up to Bovies all the time. I'd buy him a drink now and then, but he had enough already when he was there. But he could handle it pretty good in his earlier years. But when he got older, he started getting sickly a little bit. My best buddy. Of course, as I said, we played cards every Friday night. And Ann was a good friend of my wife, and we had paintings of hers in the other room. And yeah, we go to all her shows. She had like shows down. She had a studio on what's that street that goes down the hill from Constitution? Huh?
Steeple Street?
Yeah, Steeple Street. Yeah, she had a studio there, and she used to have a show there too, like a one girl show. And everybody from the East Side used to come down there. Everybody knew them. She had a twin sister, Janet, who was a tennis pro, and Ann was just a wonderful artist. And I believe she went to RISD, I'm not sure. And Carl and I were buddies. Well, I got pictures where he and Jim Mendes were my agents in those days. And we hung together all the time. I'd always be at his store. I knew him when he had the store next to the Celebrity Club, but then he opened it on North Main Street. And I used to go down there all the time. I got records he used to give me. He gave me a flute player from Australia. What was his name? Tom something or other. phenomenal. Sometimes you hear some of these foreign musicians, it's just really unbelievable. And he used to, and what I do is I'd get rid of my whole library of in those days it was all records, you know, didn't have CDs, and we didn't use tapes in those days. And I'd give him like my whole library, because he sold a lot of used, records as well. And that's the way, but anything new that came in that was great, he'd call me up, come on down, I got something for you. And we'd go down, he'd feed the cats outside, he'd always have a dish with milk in it, and I'd hang around with him. I got him a car. He was looking at a certain car, it was a Pontiac, and I was able to get it for him. I knew the guy that was selling it, and I got it real dirt cheap for him, and he drove that for quite a few years. He had a Citroen. I remember when he started the car, it used to rise up, the whole car would rise up like that, so, a French car, a Citroen. But yeah, we were very, very close. Looking at me, and I said, Frank, finally he goes over right through the heart and gets stuck in the letter C position between the wall and the bandstand. We had to go back and lift him up to get him back on the stand. And then we had a guy, Carmelo Tancredi, Arthur Tancredi's kid brother, and he was in the service with us, and we called him the Claw, because he was clumsy. I mean, he was a good baseball player and a good athlete, but if he slid into first base, he'd break the guy's ankle, and there was a Sal Yeager, I don't know if you remember him, clarinet player. Well, Sal was in the Army with me too, in the band. And Sal was a hot sketch. He was really funny. So every time we go out to have like a baseball game, he'd be standing on the side, and the game would start. And every time Carmelo would be on up at bat, he says, gum, Band-Aids, does anybody want to? Jim Mendes was just a wonderful, warm human being, a sweetheart, a pussycat. Just a wonderful person. You could sit with him, and he was elegant. He had a certain elegance about him. Even like when I wouldn't see him for a long time, and then I'd bump into him, and he would be like very proper. He was always like, I guess like growing up as a black person, that maybe he was offended many times, and he was very careful. And no matter, he couldn't let himself go. He couldn't. I was close to Jimmy, but yet nobody could get that close to him. He was always on the defensive a little bit, but a tremendous guy, and what a voice! What a voice! It was like velvet. Yeah, I loved him. He was a wonderful person. Carol Sloan. I remember Carol Sloan, and I've got a tape of she was one of the biggest one that came out of Rhode Island. What was the name of that girl that sang? She was like Barbara Streisand. She sang.
Marinaccio?
No, Mayanelli. Yeah, Diane.
Denise Marinelli.
Denise, right? That's right. I got a tape of her. Matter of fact, Mayor Cianci was there. They ran this big thing at the 1025 Club, and it was she was going out to California, and she got a big job or something, like her first big job, and so they had a big time for her, and you hear her talking, and and the mayor was talking, introducing her, and she gave me the tape. She knew me and my wife, and she was one of the best singers. She was just like Barbara Streisand, and Carol Sloan, and then there was. I met her in the Catskill Mountains. I can't even remember her name. Yeah, I never got close to a lot of the singers. There was, I can tell you, Jimmy Dell used to sing with us, a guy, and he sounded like Perry Como. I thought it even better. And Jimmy was the funniest guy in the world, because he was like a very naive individual, like Flip Phillips, as I told you. And what I used to do, I tell him, I say, Jimmy, I says, I have a secret power. I said, I don't understand it. He said, what are you talking about? So I says, I do something with my hands. I says, and it affects people. He says, how does it affect them? I says, if I do this, playing at the Alhambra Ballroom. So he gets up to sing. He gets up, and I'm sitting way off on the side. So I lean over and I go, yeah, you like this? And he doesn't sing. We're playing the introduction. He doesn't sing. So Ray Belaire says, "What are you doing?" He says, "We played it." He says, "Hold it." He stops the band. He says, "Take it from the top." He says, "Come on." And he gives a beat, and we start playing. I go like this again. He stands near the mic, and he doesn't sing. So, so he tells Ray, he says, Zaretsky's doing something. So he says, "I'm not going to look at you the next time." I says, "You don't have to." I says, "It works with my foot, too. If I bang on the ground," I said, "that it works that way, too." He says, "Don't you dare." You know, he gets up to the microphone. So I wait until he gets started. And then I go, "Pop, pop." He cracks up, and his face used to get beet red. Now, years go by. This is after the band breaks up and, you know, the guys pass away. And now Ray Belaire passed away. I don't see him, and he's an adjuster for automobiles. Like, there's a friend of mine, Richie, that owns Custom Auto Body. And he used to have, the old place was down where the Red Bridge was. So one day I stopped off to see Richie, because he and I used to play golf all the time. He was a member of Crestwood. And he says, "We're waiting for an adjuster to come down." He says, "Delatorre coming down?" He says, "Oh, Jimmy?" He says, "Yeah, I think he'll be down pretty soon." So I said, "Jimmy Dell?" He says, "Delatorre." I says, "Yeah, that's Jimmy Dell." I said, "He's a singer." He says, "No, he's an adjuster." I said, "But he was a singer. He was one of the best, you know." Anyway, I said, "Wait till he sees me." I said, "The minute he sees me, he's going to crack up, and his face gets beet red." And he had to walk down like 3 cement stairs to get into the office there. Anyway, he said, "Here he comes." He walks in, opens the door, takes one look at me, sits down on the stairs, and starts to crack up. He couldn't stop. He was, I loved him. And we had another guy that sang like Pagliacci and all the. He had a wonderful, like, operatic voice, but he was also a good jazz singer. And Tony Barron, I've got pictures of him in it too. So.
Sounds like you were a troublemaker, Adam.
Yeah, well, I used to have a lot of laughs. Downtown.
Ray Mullen?
Ray Muff.
Oh, Muff?
Muff, yeah.
I think I remember that.
Yeah, Ray Muff's on. It was on. What's the last street that? You know, like you got Weybosser Street and Westminster Street and Doran Street, I think it was. He was on Doran Street or Empire Street, one of those two. And he had a place, and he didn't do the business. And then they had this other guy that Porky worked for. Oh God, I can't remember his name. And I know his name. It's just I've forgotten it. But Porky used to work for him, a Jewish kid. And he had this big store, and he didn't do the business that Carl did. Carl started with rhythm and blues, and that got all the black neighborhood in there. And then he'd have like odd jazz things that you really couldn't find in stores. Beacon Shop was the only one that could compete with him. And Israel Off, I think, owned that. And the Beacon Shop was a big shop, and they had some pretty good jazz music there. But in those days, there was very few. So like all the musicians used to go into Carl's store, and you can always pick up something over there. And Axelrod was another place, a music store downtown. They used to be on Snow Street. Now they're on Weybosser Street. And I used to know the whole family at that time. The sons, the daughters, the mother and father that owned the store. And this Ralph Stewart one time, when I first moved in from New York, and Ralph was one of the first bands that I played with. And we were playing in a place called Belmont Gardens. And it was 3 pieces. There was Ralph on drums, and me on saxophone, and an old lady on piano, right? And they used to have what they call a country store night on Sunday nights. So he says to me one day, and I told you about him being a natural-born salesman. He says to me, "When is your birthday?" I says, "Why?" I said, "February 1st. He says, "Well, I'll tell you what, get the February 1st edition of the Downbeat magazine." I says, "Why?" He says, you buy it. Go down to Axelrod's and buy it." So there's a couple of months later, you know. So I go down one day, I thought of it, and I said, "Geez, why am I going to go down to see?" I go down to Axelrod's, and they had the Downbeat on a table. They used to have all these magazines, one on top of the other. I take a look, it says, "Ralph Stewart augments Ork Eddie Zarett joins Ralph Stewart in Providence, and it says story on page 4. And I open it up, and it says Ed Zaretsky, Eddie Zarett, joins Ralph Stewart at the Belmont Gardens, now currently playing at the Belmont Gardens. Well, that was like the Bible for jazz musicians all over the country. So I get calls from all the guys I knew in New York, right? My cousins and my friends, and oh, you hit the big time, and as soon as you went up there right away, you're in Downbeat magazine. And I said, yeah, we're playing at the Belmont Gardens. And you know how we got paid off? If it was a bad night, we got canned tomato juice. We got cans of tomato juice they used to give us. They didn't make enough money. Oh God, that was funny. Well, I'll tell you, we probably had better musicians coming out of Rhode Island than ever came out of Boston. Or I shouldn't say ever came out of Boston, but through the years that I was, playing, we had jazz giants, like Mike Renzi's and Arthur Pelosi's, and there were so many good musicians that came out of the town, in Rhode Island. All these jazz places. We had more clubs over here to go to hear jazz than you can go. Like you go to Boston, you had to go like maybe to some hotel, and in the restaurant there they'd have like a Saturday night or something. Well, they had a few places, but it didn't compare. Like Rhode Island had the best musicians. A bunch of guys went out to California. Nappy Lamar, Rico Valise. These are giants. Rico Valise sounded better than Bobby Hackett. Johnny Totola on clarinet, one of the finest jazz clarinet players I ever heard. There was another guy, that was Pete Kalaluka. There was so many guys, bass players. I used to, when I went out to California, they found out that I was a pro, and they all started to play golf at that time. They grabbed a hold of me, Nappy Lamar and Matty Matlock and the drummer and what's his name, Nick Fatul, I think it was, yeah, Nick Fatul. And I take him on a grass lot, and I'm giving him lessons, and I take him out on golf courses, and they got me a job at Chance Vought. Yeah, it was like aircraft stuff, but I didn't take the job because I wanted to play, and I'd sit in at a place called Club 47. The local over there is Local 47 for the Federation of Musicians, and they had this club, and it was all the symphony guys, the jazz players, and the studio players. They used to come in there and sit in, and so I used to go down there all the time. That's where I met this Bobby Guy, who was a lead trumpet player for NBC Studios, and he was married to Rose Marie on the Dick Van Dyke Show. And she used to make me spaghetti meatballs and dinners, and go over to their house. I'd play golf. He was a member at this Lakeside Country Club, and that's where I met all these stars. Gave Bob Hope a golf lesson the first day I was there. So, yeah, it was an exciting time in my life, and get to meet all these people. And when I was younger, like, it used to knock me out. Like I would meet my idol, Tarzan, Johnny Weissmuller. And lo and behold, he's talking very effeminate. He had a Band-Aid on his nose, and he was kind of a little bit on a drunk side, and he's swishing around. And we sat at the table for lunch, and played golf with him. Played with Gordon McRae. I played with a guy who used to play a Mounted Police, left-hander buddy of mine. A young married fella, good-looking guy, very, very classy guy, very classy wife and a little baby. So he calls me up one day and he says, "How would you like to play with the President of the United States?" I said, "Norman, you got to be kidding me." He says, "No." I read about him in the paper giving lessons to Eisenhower. One was Jim Mendes, Carl Henry, and Fred Grady. That were the three.
But I mean, were they?
Usually it was commercial.
Yeah.
Stuff that they played was commercial.
Okay.
And like Boston always had like a jazz station, one or two. Oh, yeah, okay. So, yeah, hi there. So you got any more names over there?
I heard that Jim Mendes actually sang sometimes.
Yes. Yeah, to himself. I mean, or listen to him music. He could scat sing. It was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. He used to do, what is this thing called Love? Man, could he go? He was unbelievable. I mean, you talk about Ella Fitzgerald. He cut her really, like for scat singing. And I'm talking about like beautiful ideas, like just like a musician with an instrument. He had wonderful ideas and melodic and stuff, really tremendous. And I couldn't get him to do that. When he'd do it, he'd always turn toward the wall and like kind of whisper. You could hardly hear him. I said, Jesus, I want you to work with the band, No, I got, like they're surrounding me and we're looking over music at the piano, and I got the trumpet players like playing it towards me or something. And he wouldn't do anything. He was very shy.
Could you just give me a line that Jim, something about Jim singing, just for a lead into that?
I just told you.
No, I know, but just work his name into it somehow.
Well, he wasn't like a real singer. I mean, like he asked me to tell you something about him when he's singing. All he would do is like as if somebody was humming or something.
No, but
Could you say his name? I guess
Like
we
he's
need
talking
his
about
name.
like when they put together like a thing, and
Oh.
they just want to have something about Jim.
All right.
To
Just
start,
for lead in.
something
All right,
about, like,
okay.
To get you on the top.
You,
of Jim.
are you on?
Yep.
Yeah.
And
All right. Well, talking about Jim Mendes, he was really something else. Like if this guy had a little bit more guts, or wasn't so shy, I should say, you had to hear him sing. He had as much talent as like Arthur Pelosi on tenor sax, or any melody that he would listen to, and hum it or sing it. He could scat sing it and do it better than Ella Fitzgerald or anybody that I've ever heard. Clark Terry, he just was a natural. But he was so shy that to get him to do it was like pulling teeth, And then when he would finally do it, he would do it quietly and face the wall. He wouldn't face the people because he would be shocked, like he would, he'd be distracted. But he had tremendous ears and a wonderful musician that way. And he always chose wonderful music when he was a DJ and disc jockey. He and Carl had like a wonderful program, play the real meaty stuff, the real good stuff. They had good taste for music. And the same thing with Fred Grady. These were the three big guns, actually. All the rest of the guys were more commercial, and occasionally you'd hear like a piece of jazz or something. But that's a bit of it.
okay, all right, great. That sounds
Okay.
excellent.
Yeah, well, Louis was a terrific, one of the world's best drummers. He used to work with two bass drums, and I never saw anybody use their feet as fast as he, just like a snare drum. He could like roll with his feet, And he used to have this rotating stand that he would be sitting on, and these blue lights used to go on him when he'd be taking a solo. We used to do a thing called Skin Deep, and that we feature him. And when finally it was the time for the drum solo, we'd back off to a little bit to the side, and this thing would start turning, and then all you see is like flashes of the sticks going, the feet are going, you could see everything that's happening. And it was this, like, I couldn't believe it. Disbelief. I'm just looking at him, and I forgot to come in. I'm just so amazed at what I'm watching that I never saw anything like this in my life. I mean, Buddy Rich was fast, probably even faster than Louis Bellson, but this guy was more melodic. Buddy Rich was like an unbelievable drummer, and he happened to have a different disposition, which not too many people liked. I could tell you stories about Buddy Rich, but anyway, Louis was a terrific guy, a very easygoing guy. He loved his wife, Pearl Bailey. Nobody ever thought it was going to last. He came from an affluent family. His father, I believe, was a dentist or a doctor or whatever. Came from I think it was Philadelphia, and they were pretty wealthy. And kind of frowned at his drumming, that fact that he was going to be a musician. But he made it big, and he was a wonderful guy. As a matter of fact, I have his big band recordings, and I did a big band thing with him, and on the road we backed Tony Bennett, and he had Peter Chrislieb, the tenor sax player, and he was amazing. Arthur Tancredi, myself, and two other guys worked with the band, and we did like a few spots. We did Hartford, Connecticut. We did Providence. We did Bridgeport. we were on the road a little bit, and yeah, and they had this comedian, Crosby,
Norm Crosby?
Norm Crosby, who was a hot sketch, right? And the funny part about it, the first time when we did Hartford, I see this guy walking across the stage, because the curtains are closed and we're setting up. And I see this guy, and he looked familiar to me, you know. So when I took like a double take, and he looked, he said, "Hey," and I go, "Hey," and he comes over and we give like a big hug. And I was saying, he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm playing with the band." "Oh, no kidding, that's wonderful," you know, and so on and so forth. Finally, when he leaves, I didn't know who. I said, "Who is this guy?" He says, "That's the comedian, Norm Crosby. He opens the show." He just got. I've done that so many times. Did it in California, at the Lakeside Country Club. I met the great Gildersleeve. Remember that guy? Somebody you've seen him. And so we did that whole show. And I've got, luckily I got the CD for this.
Oh, that's right.
Tape, yeah.
That's great.
And the band, and I got myself fired because I couldn't stand the band. I left the job at the Blumel Hotel.
Yeah.
And I was making good money there. And I went down to join the band, and we were rehearsing in New York. And he had a tuba, and I'm playing a lead clarinet thing, and he stops. He says, "No." He says, "I want a dotted eighths and sixteenths. Yet da 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 yet da 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 da, you know." And it's real corny, you know. And I'm a jazz musician. And Ivan is there. So anyway, every time I start playing it, he says, "No, I wanted more staccato." So the guy said, "Make believe you're kidding." He says, you know, the guy next to me says, "Just like play it real corny, you know." So I go, "Yeah, da, 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 da." Yeah, that's it, you know. So anyway, I decided right then and there, I got to find a way out of this. I got to get myself fired, because then I'll get 2 weeks' pay.
Oh, good
Because
idea.
that's what they used to do. So it so happened that in one of the rehearsals, a guy comes up that played multiple instruments. I just played tenor sax and clarinet. This guy played flute. There's Ray Montalini. He passed away just recently. Dick Johnson. This is Greg Abadi. Myself. Duke.
Do you want to keep that there for a minute, or?
It's okay. Yeah. Any of these that you want to take a picture of, you're welcome to it. This is
What?
at the Ocean Cliff Manor in Newport.
Okay.
And the same guys that you see here.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. 1981. This is Carl Henry.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
It's a
that's
bit, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember here's some that.
Oh yeah.